Welcome to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now, our weekly podcast drilling into one issue affecting Israel and the Jewish world right now. I'm your host, Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with philosopher, neighbor, and good friend, Micah Goodman, author of many, many, many books as well. So, Micah, thank you for letting me sit with you outside your house today.
Thank you, Amanda. It's nice to be here.
It is so nice to be here. Listeners, you'll hear bird song. You may hear some neighbors. It's a beautiful day, and I'm so grateful to be looking at your view. I have no view at my house, Micah, so I'm a little jealous. And it's just, I'm filled with gratitude, actually, in this moment to sit here right now, not just because my 3-year-old is at home with his older brother and I'm not there. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Today is the eve of Purim, one of the holidays that I actually despise. And we've talked about that in the past. But I have to say, I kind of dislike every single Jewish holiday. And this morning, I was walking my dog, Happy, the naughty dog, whom you've met several times. Mm-hmm. And I kind of figured out why. Why do I dislike Jewish holidays so much? And I think it's any holiday, really. And it's because it takes me out of balance, right? My life is a carefully crafted balance of work and home and, 7 kids and occasionally friends. And every holiday takes me out of balance. Purim, I think, takes me the most out of balance because it is the most out of balance holiday. Would you agree with me on that?
It's interesting. Purim is like the moment where there's a sense that we're supposed to hide. We're supposed to somehow disappear into a different personality. So by definition, you're out of balance. But I think the purpose of Purim is to return to balance, because the only way to have balance is to somehow have moments of disruption in our equilibrium of our life. And I think that Purim does that. It shakes things up.
So this is a purposeful holiday to do this in the Jewish year. And I fully respect the sages for plopping this one in here too. But I think in Israel right now, arguably even since the judicial overhaul began a few years ago, we're living out of balance.
We're out of balance.
Yeah.
We're out of balance. And at this moment, if we're trying to capture this moment in Israel, I feel like there's a strong sense the past maybe month, I can't really tell you when that began, where there's a sense that like we feel like something very big is behind us. We feel like we're after something. We also feel like we're before something. We're like in between now. Let's just breathe this in just so our listeners can understand Israeliness at this moment. And I'm talking about like this very moment. This will change maybe tomorrow. But at this moment, it seems like we're after and before. We're after Iran attacked us with all its proxies, and their proxies were smashed, and Israel was saved from that massive attack. We're after that. We are after the large phase of the war in Gaza, or after that. We're in a moment in Israel where there's all these investigations trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong, how did the entire system collapse on October 7th and the days before and the days after. So we're looking back now. Last time I was, you interviewed me here, there was a sense that we're in the middle of something very big. Well, now we're after something very big. But we're also before something very big. And here's the thing, we don't know. We are before, is there going to be a hostage deal? By the way, I always used to say brothers and sisters. Now I say brothers. We have 24 live men in Gehinnom, in hell, in Gaza now. And we have to bring them home. They are brothers. We have to bring them home. And will that happen? How quick will that happen? They need to come back home. Is there phase 2, the Witkoff thing? Like we're before that. And also, are we before another war in Gaza? We probably are so before that. And then there's the day after question. And Trump's, so we are after and we are before. We are in a moment that's in between. I think that's, if you agree with me, that's, I think, the energy of Israel right now.
I would agree with you, but I would have to say, I think it's the energy of Israel almost all the time. And right now we're just feeling it even more because it's like our whole view is tilted and we're trying to fight to right ourselves at the same time that we're also having all of these external things happening. And so the people themselves are out of balance, and the democracy is perhaps out of balance, and the political spectrum is out of balance. And we have our hearts also in Gaza, and we're also wondering what the heck is going on in Doha right now.
Yeah.
There's so much going on all the time. Our news cycle is so fast. But at the same time, we have to live our lives too every single day and sit in the gratitude and say, wow, your lavender is luscious. Micah, kol hakavod. And it's so hard to have all of this at the same time.
Yeah. But I'm focusing my thoughts now looking ahead. The hostage deal, the day after in Gaza. And is it possible to create a massive Israeli consensus around these questions? This is what I'm thinking about in the past. And
I think you should stop the sentence even earlier. Is it possible to create an Israeli consensus?
Yes. Let's start with the hostage deal, okay?
Okay. So just to back up slightly, right now we have in Doha, we have the U.S., we have obviously Qatar because they happen to live there. We have an Israeli team, not the first A team. We have the second B team, which is pretty interesting in itself. And we have the U.S., maybe I already mentioned the U.S., but the U.S. being Witkoff, who arrived, I believe, just today. And I think the focus of the talks, as far as I understand it, is meant to be on what people are calling the Witkoff proposal, which is essentially a 60-day ceasefire. In exchange, Israel will get back 10 living hostages. And as you said, there are 24 potentially, hopefully, living hostages still in Gaza. So within 60 days of the ceasefire, 10 living hostages would come back. This plan, as far as we understand it, was created in coordination with Ron Dermer, who is, of course, Israel's A-team on the hostage situation right now. So, Micah, it's not phase 2, right? It's not the mediated phase 2. It's kind of more of a phase 1.5. Phase 1 finished Saturday, depends how people count, but it finished. And so the question for many people here is, should we even continue to draw this out versus just go back to war?
Well, yeah, so that's a very important and very passionate Israeli debate that's taking place as we're talking, where this war against the Hamas part of this war has two goals. We need to destroy Hamas. We have to bring our brothers back home. And by the way, also the rest of the dead hostages, we have to bring them all home. But our first priority is to bring in the people who are suffering as we're talking. That's another thing that's happening in Israel. We know how much they're suffering now. Because our brothers and sisters that came home, they're coming home with stories, and we realize what they are going through. And we have to bring them home. We have to bring them home as quickly as possible. So the question is, how do we balance these two goals? And there is a sentiment. There is a sentiment that says, the only way to bring them home is to renew the war against Hamas, to destroy Hamas, and then to bring them home. And then there's the other school that says, first we bring them home, and then we go to war with Hamas. Now, this is without going to details of the Witkoff or the we don't know all the details as most Israelis. We know that there's two options. We all agree we need both. The question is, what is the order? First deal, then war, or first war that would maybe lead to a better deal, or just somehow will force Hamas to give in to us with no deal just because they'll surrender. Now, but the interesting thing is that while there's two schools of thought, one school enjoys the support of 70% of Israelis. Now, the 70% of Israelis is why I'm saying there is broad consensus in Israel. 70% is a lot. For Israel, it's a lot. For any country, it's a lot. Is that what most Israelis, and I belong to this majority, Amanda, is that we need to bring our brothers home now and war later. And so I was thinking about this debate. I'll try to conceptualize this debate in Israel. Some people want to see this debate the following way. One side, the one that wants first war, let's go back to war and crush Hamas. So they're saying victory above all, victory above everything else. And if we don't crush Hamas, so Israel won't be a safe place. And they're obviously right. And so what they're saying is that victory comes first. And the other school seems to be saying that it's Kedushat HaChaim, the sanctity of human life. So it seems like one school puts the collective over the individual and the other school puts the individual over the collective. And when you organize it that way, it seems like, the liberal camp, They're for a deal. The more nationalistic camp, they're against the deal. Oh, so here we have it. It's right versus left. It's just the regular battle lines of Israel. And that's it. The thing is, that conceptualization is 100% wrong. It is not a right versus left question. I can prove it to you using the data. Ever since October 7th, Israelis are moving much more to the right. At the same time, 70% of Israelis are for this deal. So it's not a left-wing idea, this deal. It's not a right versus left. We should think about it differently. And what this is not liberalism versus nationalism. Although I think I told you once on this podcast, I think most Israelis are hybrid. Most Israelis are simultaneously very liberal and very national, and that's Israel's superpower, that we're hybrid. Not all Israelis, the extremists on the left, they might be only liberal, and on the right, they're only national, but most of us are hybrid. And hybrid Israelis want this deal. And we want this deal not because of the liberal side of our identity, but because of our patriotic national side of our identity. Nationalism, patriotism, collectivism, it creates not one but two things. One is a strong need for national security. We don't trust anyone in this neighborhood besides ourselves. And with all that suspicion, we have to build a strong army to protect us and to defend ourselves and to restore our deterrence. That's one thing that patriotic people want, national security. But a second thing that patriotism gives birth to is solidarity. And what we're seeing in Israel, and I think this is probably in the entire Jewish world, but I'm living this in Israel, is that the hostages coming home, every Israeli, for the deal or against the deal, every Israeli looks at Agam Berger, looks at Liri Elbag, and there are sisters. There are sisters. And Eli Sharabi, he's our brother. And that's what nationalism does. The alchemy of nationalism. It liberates certain emotions where you experience people you don't know as your brothers and your sisters. That's nationalism. So nationalism does two things. It creates fear and it creates love. Fear of your enemies and love for your people. This debate over the hostage deal, it takes the two fruits of nationalism and they clash each other. National security and solidarity clash each other. Because it's as if I think about national security, I'm against the deal that will free thousands of murderers. But if I'm thinking about solidarity, it's national security versus solidarity. It's the two fruits of nationalism, fear of my enemies. I'm against the deal. Love of my people, I'm for the deal. So this is not liberalism versus nationalism. It's two different aspects of nationalism clashing with each other. That's why it's not a right-left issue. Israelis are very national, but the two aspects of nationalism are clashing. I think that's now. Between the two, why do I choose solidarity over national security? Why do I choose? And I'll tell you why. Because without solidarity, we don't have national security. If you ask what's leading our brave soldiers, and it's hard to exaggerate how brave our soldiers were during this war and still are. What drives them for all this self-sacrifice and devotion? And people, but in miluim and reservists, I don't know how much our English-speaking listeners know what it means to be a miluimnik, a reservist in Israel, where you're taken out of your home, you're 37, an accountant in Herzliya, and now you're 140 days in Khan Yunis. Then it's finally over, you come back home, and you're called up again because we don't have enough soldiers. Because, not enough people serve. Because of other reasons, not enough people serve. So you're called back again, and now you're in the Jordan Valley for 2 months, and then you're called back again. And they show up in big numbers. So you're asking, what is that? That's solidarity. Solidarity is the foundation of our national security. Rambam taught us something interesting, Maimonides. And this is one of the greatest contributions of Maimonides to the collective wisdom of the Jewish people. And that is that we become what we do. The actions, what we do, doesn't only reflect our personality, it also shapes our personality. This decision is going to shape our collective personality. And if we choose to go back to war when we know that they are there, our brothers are there, that will change us. That will be a direct attack on the most precious thing that Israel has, the fact that we're all brothers and sisters. And if our solidarity weakens in the long term, our national security will weaken. So choosing solidarity over national security is choosing national security on the long run.
I mean, we've actually seen that in the past, obviously, with the judicial overhaul protests and things of that nature, because the solidarity of the country was so shaken during that, that the unity was also really in question. But obviously, when the national security was threatened,
Then we saw solidarity.
Exactly.
And without solidarity, we wouldn't have any national security. So giving up on our brothers for national security, it's a little bit of a paradox. Giving up on solidarity will risk our national security. But after saying that, I want to make another point.
Okay, before you make that point, I just want to ask you something. We are here talking about Israelis for the most part, but obviously the Jewish people is also part of this national identity,
Yes.
right? But they don't have the national security fears that we do as well. And so it's interesting. Everything you're saying to me makes me think, this so explains what's happening with Jewry around the world in terms of the conflict of conceptions between Israelis and the diaspora. So make your point and think about that at the back of your brain and then come back to it maybe.
So it's hard. I wasn't outside of Israel the past few weeks. So I don't know how it feels when the hostages come home. It's experienced as our sisters coming back home, our brothers coming back home. And the anxiety of this deal that letting all the terrorists out and also just seeing Hamas with their white Toyotas and their disgusting costumes, and just seeing that. And you realize, wow, if there's a deal, do they get a free ride? And if they get a free ride, they get to October 7th us and to stay alive. That is a massive risk to our national security. So the dilemma is real. But 70% of Israelis, this is not liberalism versus nationalism, just two aspects of nationalism clashing. And most of us choose solidarity over national security because solidarity is national security. But I want to make now a caveat. I think there's something else going on here. And that's how do we experience time. Western experience of time and Middle Eastern experience of time is very different. Western, secular, modern experience of time is always like the past. Only the very near past has influence over me. But the far past, we're not like, okay, that has no... And people that don't have strong connection to the far past, the tradition, also usually have a different attitude towards the future. We think about immediate results. We think about immediate achievements. We always want quick wins. We always have cash value, like within 3 months, what happened? We measure things very, very quickly. And the long run is very hard for us, for Westerners, to think. Middle Easterners, which are more religious, more traditional, more tribal, think differently about time. The Arabs feel like Israelis remind them of the Crusaders. Now we're like, really? But that was a very long time ago. But they're like, no, that was yesterday. We're Middle Eastern. We experience time differently.
That was yesterday. And it was also a blip on the timeline of Islam. If you think about it, the Crusaders, how long were they here? 120
80 years, 100 years, whatever. Yeah.
Nothing major.
And so you have like, okay, so if they experience like that as if it's yesterday, also Middle Easterners feel like, okay, the way we measure success is not immediately. We have time. When America here, a great way to think about how two concepts of time, Western and Middle Eastern, are clash is like the war in Afghanistan. 2001, America invades Afghanistan, quick wins, immediate victories. But in the long game, America lost. Taliban took over. And so America played a quick game, but Middle Easterners played the longer game. And after they were lost, so some people in the Taliban said, you know how we beat you? You have watches. We have time. You have watches. I mean, you're trying to measure every second. You're looking for time is money. We have to do things quickly. You have watches. We have time. We play the long game. Now, ever since October 7th, there is a tendency in Israel saying, we have to be more Middle Eastern. There's a saying in Israeli slang, we have to learn how to speak Arabic, which means think like Middle Easterners. Now, I'm against thinking like a Middle Easterner. I'm also against thinking like a Westerner. I think we're hybrids. Being Israelis, being a Westerner, Middle Easterner, that's who we are. And I think many of our values are Western, like cherishing human life and individual life. but maybe the way we experience time needs to be Middle Eastern, and this is how this will be played out. What happens if we go into war now against Hamas? I think our chances of succeeding are very low. I'll tell you why. One, we don't have the element of surprise. I mean, if we're going to war now, nothing is, they're waiting for us. They know we're coming. Two, we're limited in using power because our brothers are there in the tunnels. Just to remind you, not you, but our listeners, if Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, would have had 4 hostages with him in the bunker, he would have been alive today. The only reason why he is dead and Hezbollah is crushed is because they didn't have any hostages. The reason why Hamas is not crushed is because they have hostages. So going into war now, we don't have an element of surprise, and we're limited in our ability to do real damage to Hamas. Nothing that didn't change. And finally, because 70% of Israelis want a deal, if we go into war without a deal, it won't be a war supported by all the Israelis. And Israel doesn't know how to win wars that don't enjoy a massive consensus. But now let's think about it differently. What happens if we make a deal, pay the price, bring our brothers back home, and also all the dead hostages? We bring them all back home, our brothers and our sisters back home. And then a half a year from now, a year from now, a year and 2 months from now, I don't know when we're ready and they're not, out of the blue, a surprise attack on Hamas.
Micah, why in the world would Hamas give up all the hostages? Why in the world would they not surround themselves with the 4 last hostages?
That's a very good question. But I'm saying if there is a possible deal, if there is a deal. So the war that's after the deal is a war that is managed starting without the 3 obstacles. We have the element of surprise. 1, we don't have hostages protecting Hamas. 2, and guess what? Israel would be behind that war, with a war that enjoys unity and consensus, which means, and this is what I'm saying to Israelis in the past few weeks, a deal does not replace victory. It's not instead of victory. The deal is a condition to achieve victory. Without a deal, there is no victory over Hamas. But what does that mean? That there is no victory now. We have to experience time in a Middle Eastern way to buy this thesis. Because if we're all Western thinking led Israelis in the past to want peace now. Now it's leading Israelis to want victory now. But the only peace that's possible is that peace doesn't come now. And the only victory that's possible is the victory that doesn't come now.
Micah, wouldn't you say that since Hamas gained control of the Gaza Strip, we've entered into basically a controlled management of Gaza, meaning it was never about victory. It was always about
true. That's true. It's because we didn't understand where we were living. We made a big mistake that we let Hamas grow and live and prosper. So we made a very big mistake.
What would be the difference?
The difference is that we learned from our mistake. The difference is that by the way, this is the Israeli debate. The first way it's to conceptualize this debate is different aspects of nationalism. A different way is different experiences of time. A third way is to ask, do you believe that Israelis changed on October 7th? People in the Israeli right that are against the deal, they're saying, we know what's going to happen. After they come home, after the hostages come home, Israelis will be tired of this war. We'll go back to our startup nation. Tourism will come back. Investments will come back. We'll fall in love with the peace and quiet, and we won't want to violate that with a surprise attack on Hamas. That's thesis number 1. Thesis number 2 is, yes, the people that would have done that were the Israelis, pre-October 7th Israelis. We're new Israelis. We're different Israelis. We know that Hamas can't stay alive. And we have our time. We're Middle Eastern, but one day, in the not far future, but not in the immediate future, when our brothers come home, we're going to get them. Now, I think Israelis changed. That's the debate. If you don't believe Israelis changed, you think if we take this deal, Hamas gets a free ride. If you believe Israelis changed and you have a Middle Eastern concept of time, you know Hamas does not have a free ride. So I believe that Israelis changed. I believe we're not the same people we were pre-October 7th. I think that if we look at Israel's history, the Yom Kippur War transformed Israel. October 7th is a much more transformational moment than the Yom Kippur War. So, and in that sense, if we're willing to experience time in a Middle Eastern way, victory will come only if it's not victory now. Our brothers, because you see, there's two watches here. There's the way we experience historic time and biological watch. There's the biological watch. The biological watch, that's our hostages. They're in the tunnels. They're in the Shoah. I think we could say that. They're in the Shoah now. We have to bring them home. They don't have Middle Eastern time. They don't have time. We have to bring them home. But the destruction of Hamas, that will come. And it will come when we're united. One, the hostages aren't there, and we have the element of surprise. That's how we'll take out Hamas.
I still don't think that, I mean, I hear you and I understand your theories, but I still don't think that Hamas will ever give up all the hostages.
Okay, so here's the big question. If Hamas won't give up all their hostages, so there is no dilemma. There is no deal. So we have to go back to war. But Hamas says that they're willing to give up all the hostages if we give up on the war. And I say, let's take it. You know why? Because I trust Hamas. I trust Hamas that they'll give us not one, but 17 reasons to attack them. I mean, the way I see it, I maybe this is a little bit too an overstatement, but I told some Israelis that are against the deal is saying you think Israelis didn't change. You must think that Hamas did change. You think Israelis didn't change because they won't have what it takes a year from now when we're enjoying the fruit, when the war is over, to resume war. And you think Hamas did change. It's like they're not gonna make a mistake and fire a rocket at us. My assumption is the opposite. Israelis changed, Hamas didn't. And those two assumptions means, yeah, the war will end and then it will begin. And Hamas will give us 17 reasons why to begin that war.
And so then I return to the other approach, which is crush Hamas. Don't have another war. Don't have another war. Don't have another war.
This war is now in halftime. The war with Hamas is in halftime. Stage 1 is over. Hostages come home. Stage 2 will be just to finish off Hamas. And by the way, this takes us to the day after.
But wait, Micha, we're not at stage 1. We're at stage 20. We've already had 20 different wars with Hamas, right?
The October 7th war. October 7th war.
But it's still Hamas.
It's still, right? Hamas is alive. Hamas is alive.
And has been alive because every other war has ended with this idea of, okay, there'll be another war.
Every war we had with Hamas, the purpose of the war wasn't to destroy Hamas. This is the first war that its purpose is destruction of Hamas. And I think we could still fulfill that purpose, but we have to think about the time, about time differently. The timeline is different. We have to be more Middle Eastern, thinking more like Middle Easterners and not like Westerners. We have to have Western values, but Middle Eastern time.
So this war actually continues, but it's on a very long halftime show.
Yes.
For maybe even a year. Could be even 2 years. Maybe.
I'm Middle Eastern. Right. I can take that. I'm a netzach lo mefachad min derech aruka. The eternal people we're not afraid of the long journey.
Okay, so I want to talk to you actually before you get to the day after a little bit about Israelis' connection to historical roots and the Bible specifically. Okay, every single army ceremony that I've been to has been connected to the Bible. Every single ceremony in Israel has been connected to the Bible. And so I would propose to you that Israelis already experience time very much like a historical people, like the Middle Easterners that we also are. So I wonder about this particular thesis of yours that we've become too Western and need immediate gratification.
When I see Israelis wanting victory now, let's just do it now. Let's finish. We can't wait. I'm saying the only thing that can't wait is our hostages. Victory will only come if we wait. And I see this, and I see, yes, it's true. We're very biblical. We're very traditional, but we're also very technological. And technology trains your mind to have immediate results. You press a button, a light is on. You press another button and your voice is heard. I had a conversation with somebody in Australia today. I pressed a button, bang, my voice is in Australia. Technology trains our mind to think about immediate results. And this war, we will win this war only if we wean ourselves from our addiction, our Western addiction to immediate results.
Okay, very interesting. Obviously, of course, many of the biblical characters could also have used that advice, right?
That's right.
Okay, so let's turn to the idea of the day after. And right now on the table, there are basically two main approaches. One is the Trump approach, which is essentially to clear the Gaza Strip of its population in order to rebuild it and potentially allow the population to return. Not very clear on that part. And the other approach is to not clear the population and to allow the Gazans to remain. That's also not very clear how that's going to happen. Of course, both parties, the Trump approach, the American approach versus the Egyptian approach, the Arab leadership approach, they have a lot of their own agendas in proposing these two different approaches. And I don't know, when I heard the Trump approach, I just didn't even feel like it was a serious proposal, but more like something to push the envelope a little farther.
I'll tell you, there's, I think, a deep connection between infantile way of thinking and utopian political thinking. What do children want? Daddy, make the problem go away. Please just make it go away.
Or make whatever I want appear suddenly
Bang. Yeah. Now, maturing is understanding problems are here to stay. You can't press a button and it will disappear. So you have to deal with it. Now, I think there's the two dominant approaches. Let's say you're sitting in Nir Oz in the kibbutz next to Gaza. They went through a terrible catastrophe on October 7th. And you're looking at the fence and you're looking at Gaza. On the other side, there's roughly 2 million Palestinians, right? And you know that they hate you. They really hate you. And so utopian fantasies are born. How does just daddy make the problem go away? One way is that they'll stop hating me. Now that's a left-wing fantasy. If we'll just two-state solution, whatever, we'll give them what they want. Eventually, there'll be coexistence. They won't hate me anymore. Trump brought a different approach. It's not that the hate will go away. The Palestinians will go away.
Boom.
Boom. So now both fantasies are utopian and infantile and childish. Just one approach says the hate won't be there. The other said the Palestinians won't be there. Now, I belong to centrist, center-right, center-left, center-center Israelis, which a majority of Israelis realize two things. One, they will always be here. The Palestinians, they're here to stay. Even if, 200,000 of them migrate from their own will somewhere else. Okay, so it's not 2 million, it's 1.8. Okay, the Palestinians are here to stay. And guess what? They'll always be hostile. For the foreseeable future, they will hate us. And if the hate is here to stay and the people are here to stay, which means the problem is here to stay, we have to liberate ourselves from the addiction to those fantasies. And the mature way to understand, okay, now that we understand they're both here to stay, now let's start the conversation of the day after. I think the two-state solution fantasy and the transfer fantasy, which are two fantasies, utopian, somehow the problem won't exist anymore, are blocking our way to having the real conversation. The problem is here. It's here to stay. It sucks. That's what it means to be an adult, to understand that, okay, it sucks. It's here. Now, how do we directly deal with it?
That's it? No, there's no answer. You can't stop there.
No, the problem is here to stay. The problem is here to stay. But there is a difference. By the way, between these two fantasies, there is a difference. The peace fantasy, which most Israelis are just, you would agree with me, they're not there anymore.
Yeah, it's done.
But I think people in the Jewish world and people around the world still believe, well, just Blinken and Biden, just do a two-state solution.
I don't think they believe it at all.
But they're saying it's rhetoric.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a fantasy that just by raising it, you're creating expectations. And then the expectations aren't met. Historically, there's violence. So that's a fantasy that it's very that just by talking about it, you think you're promoting peace, you're actually always creating expectations that lead to war or to more violence. That's not. But the other fantasy, the transfer fantasy, it's a new fantasy. Now, it's never going to become a reality. And I think fantasies are not healthy because they build a wall between us and reality. But I think it's less harmful than the peace fantasy. Because just the fact that it's out there, maybe one day when we won't do it, we could trade that for peace. We're talking about Saudi Arabia. So while the two-state solution is something that when it doesn't happen, like the second intifada has everything to do with the fact that the two-state solution fantasy turned out not to be a reality. So there was expectations. It didn't happen. Boom, we have a second intifada, a certain form of a war. The transfer fantasy, it's not going to happen, but just the fact that it's out there, maybe down the line, someone will be able to trade that for normalization with Saudi Arabia. So it's as opposed to the two-state solution, when it doesn't happen, doesn't lead to war, it could lead to peace. So it's a less harmful, these are both fantasies. This one is a less harmful fantasy.
I would agree with you that if it were to happen, it probably would play out like that. It's some kind of peace package with Saudi Arabia, a domino in the way to getting to that peace package. But I just wanted to ask you, I know we've been talking for a long time. You mentioned the first intifada, the second intifada. I wonder sometimes, we've been so looking at Gaza, Hamas and Gaza, but it appears to me, I mean, obviously there's been an uptick in terror attempts and successes over the past several months. And I do wonder if we should be conceiving of this period as the third intifada versus the Gaza war, because, of course, Hamas has taken over much of the Palestinian West Bank and they reign there for all intents and purposes. And so even if we do create some kind of, I don't know, cessation of hostilities for the moment, halftime show in Gaza, we still have the West Bank to deal with. And the mediation that's happening in Doha right now is not going to be covering that. So are we potentially right now?
I would say the chances are not low that we're facing a third intifada. The chances are not low. I don't know. They're also Iran. We're before big things.
Yeah.
We're after things that are very, very big things happen. We're after them. We're thinking about them, reflecting on them, we're investigating them. And we are in a moment of uncertainty. We know we're before 2025. I think if we look at the potential of 2025, I think the agenda of our national leadership needs to be war and peace. Peace between Israelis. How to reach a real peace agreement between Israelis. And as I tried to show here, even on the most loaded questions, most Israelis agree. On the most loaded questions, there's critical mass of agreement in Israel. And yet, the paradox of Israelis, that while most of them agree, they still fight with each other and can't stand each other. That's the paradox of it. We're ideologically, we're closer than ever, but emotionally, we're further from each other than ever.
Until the moment of truth, right?
Until the moment of truth. And so we need peace, and there might be an opportunity, an Iran opportunity this year. So this might be the year of peace and war. But the only war that's successful against our enemies is a war that comes out of a unified Israel. So I think that's how our national leaders have to be thinking about. I'm not sure they're thinking about it this way, by the way. I don't think they know that the condition for war is peace. War with our enemies is peace within ourselves. That's why I'm for a deal. We have to because if we go to war, it will break the peace between Israelis. Many Israelis won't support that war. It would break our unity. A war that's after the deal is where it comes with unity. I think the same goes for Iran. We have to make peace inside and then war with our enemies. And that might be 2025.
Micah, I could speak with you for hours, but I've taken up too much of your time. So thank you for letting me sit in your lovely garden, listen to the birds, and see your great view.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan. If you have any comments or questions about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. Until next week, Shalom.